Hello, I hope that you're doing well. I'm going to be reporting on some new news that just came out, and this concerns the CFA franc. So, this is the CFA franc originally used in colonies in Africa that were formerly French colonies, and these are the ones that are highlighted in this map over here. So, with this currency, what we have is that in the green we have West Africa, in the red we have Central Africa. So this franc is called the CFA franc, which is colonial French financial association. All right, we'll get to the actual acronym, but then it has strong colonial connotations. So in West Africa and Southern Africa, these French colonies use the CFA franc. So it's used in West Africa in 8 West African countries, and in Central Africa in 6 Central African countries. So all in all, we have 15 countries that are using this. All right. So we have eight. So we have 14 countries that are using this. All right. So both countries are guaranteed by the currencies are guaranteed by the French Treasury, although two CFA currencies have always been at parity. So these are two XAF and XOF as the ISO currency code. So the XAF is for the Central African countries, the ones in red. The XOF are for the ones in green. So the ones in green are 8 countries. All right. So the news that came out is related to this statement. On December 22nd, 2019, it was announced that the West African currency would be replaced by an independent currency to be called the ECO. So what's happened is that this currency has been scratched, but the other one for Central African countries in red remains. So the ECO. So the ECO currency is a proposed name of the currency of the West African currencies. So this includes all of the countries that were in the West African zone and other countries as well. Okay. So it would include future countries in this area, including countries like Nigeria, which will be the main contributor in this eco currency. So since Nigeria is the biggest economy in Africa, this is a very big thing. All right. So after its introduction, the goal is to merge the new currency with the West African CFA franc used by most French-speaking members of ECOWAS. ECOWAS is West African. Since 1945, this will create a common currency in much of West Africa. So for them to actually have this eco currency, they have to pass 10 criteria. So they have to have single digit inflation, fiscal deficit of no more than 4% of GDP, central bank deficit financing of no more than 10% of previous year's tax returns, and the gross external reserves that can give import cover for a minimum of 3 months. So these are the 4 primary criteria, the 4 criteria that are most important in launching this currency. So a lot of the current countries have not been able to meet that criteria, but this is still being launched. So you could read this page, it has a lot of this information. And in 2020, there's a lot of stuff that's happened. So you see, like this article, in my opinion, needs some editing. But this raw data is important, and that's what we're going over. So I'm just going to switch over to this site, and we're just going to discuss the evolution of this currency quickly, because it's going to affect the the growth engine of Africa, because this is affecting 15 African states plus France. And so this is a CFA franc to the eco. So these are what we're going to be discussing, and as we've already gone over, the CFA is broken down into two, and the eco is a breakdown of the other CFA currency that is used in the Western countries, which are 8 in total. So the evolution of a controversial currency. So it's pretty controversial. So let's see why. So the countries affected, West Africa used the West African Economic Monetary Union, and not affected by this are the people in the Central African who have their money from the Central African Bank. So in effect, there are actually two banks, one in West Africa, one in Central Africa, and they both print money for their respective regions. So they do this and they circulate the currency within their own regions. And the currencies are XOF and the other one XAF, and the one for the West African bloc and the one for the Central African, and they actually do this harmoniously. So it's an interesting thing going on there. So it's used by 14 states. All right. So over the weekend, the Ivorian president and Emmanuel Macron continue drive debate across the continent because of their announcement. So in this article, it's speaking about the currency that has been used for over 75 years. So it has colonial origins, and the CFA franc has its initials coming from the French words for Africa Financial Community. So we have the FA for Finance Africa, but it actually comes from this quotation here in quotation marks that says franc of the French colonies of Africa. So the C from the colonies, the French from the French, and Africa for Africa. So colonial French Africa. So this is what it is. So it has a strong connotation to colonial origins. So it's actually colonial French Africa franc. That's what it is. So that's not a good thing, in case you're wondering. But they've been using it for a greater part, for close to 100 years, you know. So this is important because now this has ended, right? So 14 nations divided into West and Central African groups use the currency today. Okay, so the CFA is broken into two, for the West and for the Central Africans. However, there are 115 million people who use this currency. This accounts for 14% of Africa's population and 12% of our GDP output. This is according to the IMF. So this is a big deal. 12% of Africa's GDP is tied to the CFA. So as we've gone over the two users, so the 8 countries in the West African Monetary Union are Burkina Faso, Ivory Coast. So the president of Ivory Coast is the one who actually made the announcement with Emmanuel Macron. We have Guinea-Bissau, we have Mali, Niger, Senegal, and Togo. So this has a bank in Dakar, which is in Senegal, which is the issuing authority of the central. So its Dakar-based issuing authority is the central bank of West African states. So the West African states have their own central bank, which issues their money to their own people in the West African part, right? And the other 6 in the Central African Economic Monetary Union. So we have the West African Monetary Union. This one is the Central African Economic and Monetary Union, which has Cameroon, Central African Republic, Chad, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, and the Republic of Congo. And it has its own bank in Cameroon. That is a central bank in the center. All right, so this is the Bank of the Central African States. So this is a central bank for the Central African States. And there's also another bank that's central to the Western. So the European links are there. So this is the peg that the CFA used to have to the euro. So the arrangement they have is that the Bank of France holds half the country's total reserves. So this was an issue because when you have this currency printed in France, right, and the French actually give you their currency so that you can use in your own region, you don't have any monetary sovereignty to make your own monetary, economic, or financial policies as you see fit within your own country. And to make it worse, what happens is that half of the money, right, is kept in France. So they are not, they don't have access to half their money. It's in France. It's in French reserves. So France pays a ceiling interest rate of 0.75% annually for this. The arrangement guarantees unlimited convertibility of francs into euros and facilitates interzone transfers. So the justification for this is that they're doing this so that the currency is always convertible to francs, to CFA francs into euros or vice versa. So this is a good thing in terms of giving confidence to the people, which will give credence to the fact that they have convertible currency that's unlimitedly convertible. So this is an advantage of this type of arrangement. So CFA notes and coins are printed and minted at the Bank of France in the southern town of Charmelise. Both the regional African banks that supervise the CFA variants have established price stability as an overriding objective. So this is what the people have been saying, the calls for change. All right, so a lot of people think that the link to France provides credibility and price stability, as we've just said. And some critics say the arrangement is post-colonial, right? Meaning that it happened after colonization. So this happened preventing countries from exercising monetary sovereignty, right, after colonization. So it's a remnant of that, which is put in order so to systematically exercise money, to systematically prevent countries, right, post-colonially from exercising monetary sovereignty and enabling France to wield clout. Weird word, right? Yeah, to wield clout in its former colonies. So France is basically clout chasing. So options put forward in the debate have ranged from symbolic name change. So this colonial name is actually a big thing because, you know, it's colonial French Africa currency. So that's not cool. So the pegging of the CFA against a basket of currencies was another suggestion, that they'll just take the euro, the dollar, the yuan, and make a whole basket that is linked to this currency. And this is something that they were thinking about. So some economists have argued the transfer of CFA reserves to other institutions. So this is in reference to half of the money that's kept in France. So these reserves. So they say that they should transfer those reserves to other institutions and end to strict monetary policy in order to have more development and more jobs and more growth. Because when the money is locked up, then they can't use it as they would want to invest in their own economy. So now we're here. Okay, so the rise of the eco. So this is in quotations, all right? So this is what we're going to be discussing, because this is the development, this is the news. So under a major reform announced on Saturday, so this is speaking on this date, on the 16th of May, okay? Because this is from so this is from this news article, and don't worry, we're gonna go into the more updated article. So under the major reform announced on Saturday, the West African CFA franc will change its name to the ECO. All right. So what happened is that the West African franc just changed its name to the ECO because of the connotations and among other things. So its countries will no longer have to lodge the 50% of their reserves in the Bank of France. So this is the thing, they're freeing up half their money. They'll be able to invest this money where they see fit. This is great. So France will also sever institutional ties, withdrawing from the Central Bank of West African States Board and Monetary Policy Committee, Banking Commission of the West African Banking Commission. So it's basically pulling out of the boards and the committees and banking commissions, and giving more autonomy to the countries in the ecozone. So not only is the name changing, but they're also pulling back and also freeing funds. However, the eco will maintain its fixed exchange rate to the euro. So this aspect in itself, I think it's a key in understanding that this may not be a bad thing, because when you have parity with the euro, it means that there's more predictability in investments, which would encourage businesses to make decisions knowing that whatever is happening is linked to developed economies, which gives a good rate of measurement of how to gauge the currency performance, because it means that it has a backing that is strong. It means that there's more confidence in it, and that exchange rate would mean that it has the purchasing power that is found in Europe, as long as they're able to maintain it at that parity. So France will keep its role as the backup of the 8 countries, even though it's pulling out of the West African Monetary Union countries. So France will provide a guarantee in the form of a line of credit, right, for the West African bank, in order that if they face a currency crash, they will get euros on demand, which is good. So the ECOWAS, this is the ECO area, this is West Africa and the ECO. So this is where we're now at. The shift by the 8 nations is being described by France as a precursor step to creating a single currency by the 15 members, 15 including France, of the Economic Community of West African States. So, I don't know how you read into this, but then this is the rhetoric from France, that they're creating a single currency in the whole Western African states, including those countries that were already part of the Central and the West African Union zones, to have a single monetary policy, single currency, and all of that. So ECOWAS countries this year agreed to adopt a single currency, also called the ECO, as early as 2020. So now we're looking in real time right now. This is what they were proposing then, this is what's happened now, right? But whether this timetable will be met is far from clear. 7 ECOWAS countries have their own currencies, and none of them is freely convertible. It's a big deal. The big regional player is Nigeria, which accounts for 2/3 of output. So Nigeria will be the other member that's not already part of this monetary union, but that will be included because it is a regional input that will be a major factor in determining the power strength and usability output of this new currency. So Nigeria cautioned that countries will have to do more to meet the single currency's criteria. All right. So so we've already gone through some of the criterias, and there they are again. But this does not address the other franc, right? Because there are 2 CFA currencies, and the other one is for the Central African countries. So this has not been exactly spelled out as yet. But here we're gonna go to today's news right here, right? So France ratifies. So we were speaking about that happening back then, but this has been ratified officially. All right. So this is what we're reading in this article here was the evolution of this new currency, right? So this has been brewing for a very, very long time, and now we are at a point where they've ratified this. So let's just scan through this. The much-awaited bill has been adopted on Wednesday by the French Council of Ministers. This was disclosed by the spokeswoman for the French government. All right. It was during an official visit to Ivory Coast in December 2019 that President Macron and the French West African leaders announced a historic reform of monetary cooperation that was the lead to the end of the CFA franc. But remember, it's just one of them. The other one is still in force. As the President of the Republic had been able to stress, the end was part of a renewal of a relationship between France and African countries. So the text validates the transition of the CFA franc used by 8 French West African countries, right, former colonies, to become the newly mooted ECO. Alright, that's an interesting word. Let's actually look what this word means. I need to look it up. Alright, so I went to moot etymology. It means debatable, subject to discussion. Alright, and moot it sounds a lot like mute, arguable, debatable, unsolved, or impossible to solve. This is what we're talking about. So this newly debated eco, all right, so newly debated eco currency, a currency to be adopted by the entire West African bloc ECOWAS. It also marks the end of the centralization of foreign exchange reserves. So this is what we're talking about, of the 8 West African states with the French treasury. So it frees up their funds. In concrete terms, the Central Bank of West African states will no longer have to deposit half of its foreign exchange reserves with the Bank of France. France will also have to withdraw its presence from the governance bodies. So they're gonna be withdrawing from the governance of these places. And again, the fixed parity of the future eco currency with the euro. So they're gonna fix the two currencies so that 1 euro equals 1 eco. So this will have to be maintained, and as much as they maintain this is going to be a good thing for development in terms of knowing the currencies. But then the problem will be if the European economy is, like if anything bad happens to the Eurozone, let's say Germany has a problem, which is the biggest country in the Eurozone, right? And then if Germany has a problem, that is going to also affect the eco currency. However, this could mean that it would create demand for the eco relative to the euro and vice versa. But we're going to be monitoring how that happens, and we can also look at this in terms of how it's already affecting other zones. So we could go to Southern Africa, where we have the Rand areas, countries that use the Rand. And that would be an interesting subject for another day, so that we can compare the eco to the Rand, and then we'll see how that actually works and what we can look out for, what we should consider and things like that. So 8 countries: Benin, Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire, which is Ivory Coast, Guinea-Bissau, Mali, Niger, Senegal, and Togo. Critics of the CFA perceive it as one of the last vestiges of France's colonial domination. So what do you think about that? This is perceived as one of the last vestiges of France's colonial domination. The Central African version of the currency XAF, however, continues to be used in the 6 countries across the region. So the Central African currency still lives, and this is what we've actually just gone over, and I hope that there's some value in this, and that we can see how this will affect the region, affects everything else. So we went over this region and how it's going to be affected by what happens in all of these countries, including the future countries that will join the region. So namely this area in the West African, plus the areas in red, which are the future eco areas. So the eco currency is going to affect these areas as long as they can meet these main 4 points plus others. And eventually this is also going to affect Central Africa, and we'll see how that effect propels into the future and what we can consider. But for now, this is the landscape, and this is the news. So yeah, so thanks a lot for paying attention to this and watching this, and I hope that your investments are going well and everything is awesome. So we'll talk soon.